Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. I have Mike Wittenstein with me today. And I'm trying to think when I first met Mike. It was probably, well over 10 years ago. And perhaps one of the most influential people in my mind about crafting my knowledge and passion around, the topics of customer experience. And he was kind enough to do some work with me and for me at organizations. And it's always a delight to talk with Mike and learn what he's doing and be inspired by him. So Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. For myself, and I know you're in constant evolution, you're constantly reinventing. That's part of your magic. Can you share with us what is it that you do, and why do you do what you do?
Well, first, thank you for having me. It's amazing to see you. And we met at European Customer Experience World. It was in London. Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah.
So what I did for about 15 years with Story Miners that I founded in 2002 was customer experience design work. After I left my role at IBM as their e-visionary, I realized that there was lots and lots and lots of data and not a lot of thought put into it before people actually decided what were they going to do with it and how are they going to act on it. What happened over and over and over again was people who were basically market researchers were saying, oh, you should do this. And nobody paid attention to how it rolled out. So what happened is you got a whole bunch of inward-facing initiatives, things that people were trying to get customers to do rather than things that people were trying to do for customers. So there was like this hurt problem where it just wasn't connecting. So people's numbers would go up, but then they'd drop off permanently, and they were kind of wondering why. So my purpose in doing this is severalfold. You and I share an ability to see patterns ahead of other people. And I used to think that was a superpower, but I think that's just unevenly distributed around the population. I've known lots of people that have that ability. It's, it's not every day, but it's not surreal. So anyway, when we see these patterns ahead of time, I like others to be able to take advantage to it. From the perspective of being a customer, I hate it when brands lie to me. I hate it when they make me wait, or they mistreat me, or they steal from me. It's just not right. And that's something that I want to fix. That's my way of making the world a little bit better. And from leave the world a little better place than before. I think what I've been working on without really declaring it, maybe I'm saying it today for the first time, is helping the world create more value with the resources that it has rather than taking more value. Because so much of the way people operate by design is to take value out of the systems that are under their purview. They keep wanting to take profit. And profit's a good thing because it sparks investment, keeps businesses going and things like that. But if you take too much, you end up hurting your organization's ability to serve customers. And that makes them want to go elsewhere. And that one little part, that one little bit of greed is what creates so much churn. And we end up with a zero-sum game in many cases. So that's my opener.
and create value like that. But it's knowing you for quite some time. When I hear the words create value, that sometimes can seem maybe impersonal. And I know that not only are you busy with, creating value, maybe with limited resources, but there's also a human aspect, a human connection aspect, a real authentic aspect, or a respect aspect. That's another maybe dimension of that.
I'm really glad you opened that up. Keep going, and then
Well, for me, that's the question. Is it? I think there's also maybe a call it commercial, the financial dimension of value creation, value capture, and resources. But I think there's also a humanness to all of this.
Yeah.
And that humanness is what you have triggered in me to think about, when thinking. And so I'm curious, how do you blend those the human dimension and that commercial dimension in order to create that value?
Here's how you do that. Great question. And thanks for opening up that topic, because when I said value creation, I didn't mean money. I meant outcomes for customers.
Mm-hmm.
The best way to measure value is from your customer's perspective. So if they value your service because it makes them feel good, because it saves them time, because it reduces effort, because they feel like their ego gets stroked, whatever it is, that's the definition of value. And the more of that you can provide more reliably, the more that customer will stick with you and share it with their friends and all that stuff. So back to your question, how do you blend those two together? In my opinion, you just have to switch the order. Because most of the strategy folks that I talk to, not everyone, but I'm generalizing a little bit, but I don't usually generalize about individual people. They put the money side first. How are we going to make money? And then how are we going to serve customers?
Mm-hmm.
If during the design of your customer experience, when you're going in between data and what you're going to do differently, you think about all the different ways that you can create value for your customers. It can be emotional value. It can be prestige value. It can be heirloom value. There was an article in Forbes a couple of years ago that detailed out kind of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it was all emotions-based, fabulous stuff. I'll get you that link and you can.
Yeah, I'm going to write that down. Yeah, let's add that to the notes.
Yeah. So if you focus your organization's capabilities and resources and processes, technology and people on delivering outcomes that customers value first, and then you put your engineering hat on to optimize the way things work and to squeeze out the most profit, that's the way you get it to blend. And what's happened with my clients at Story Miners is consistently they get more of both. Yeah. And that's amazing. If you deliver more value to customers, not take it away, not reduce the size of the bag inside of the same size cereal box. I hate that. It's just not fair.
No, yeah, that is yeah, it's not fair. It's almost theft, if not really theft. So yeah, it's interesting that the words we use in business land, like value and customer, are so impersonal, and sometimes they fail us. And I think that's why we need people like you out there and Story Miners and your work that you're doing there. So I would love to hear, because I know you've been, it's been a while since we spoke, and I'd love to see what's the latest iteration or evolution of Story Miners. What are you doing now with Story Miners, and who are you doing it with, or for, I guess?
Thanks for asking.
Yeah.
It used to be that we went after the customer experience director or vice president and helped them really improve their experience. Mm-hmm. Well, starting about 18-ish months ago, we started to get some pushback. Mike, that's my job, and I like my job. I don't want to hire you because this is too much fun. Mm-hmm. So we got, okay, so what do we do next? Mm-hmm. Still love customer experience. Still love strategy, still love the design aspects of it, still love how you can transform a business's back end and front end with technology, that whole digital transformation thing. Well, I'm going to tell you something about how I think, and then I'll tell you which direction we're headed. Here's what I learned after interviewing about 100 folks, leaders of all different size companies in the last 18 months. I learned that everybody thinks they're the center of the universe. If you're in customer experience, or user experience, or user interface, or technology, or anything, you tend to build the world around the things that you know. You see yourself as the sun, and the world revolves around you. You know what? Everybody's right. Every one of those disciplines brings something valuable to the table. But as we all share information more quickly, and as we all become more open-minded, we're begging, borrowing, and stealing from everybody else's treasure trove of tools. So what we're finding is each of these perspectives has room in it for many of the others. Even Six Sigma, which I thought was, the ultimate, accountant's dream, actually has room in it for good design. So, and vice versa. So it's surprising. So what I figured out was that after these 100 conversations, I was hearing from executives that they were having a really hard time getting their people to follow them. They weren't buying into the new strategies and the big ideas. Sometimes it was blatant resistance, and other times it was just couldn't get things going. So I asked the other side. I asked the frontline employees and the managers. And this was, of course, with permission and sometimes on my own, just, people from different companies. And I learned that they were suffering from exactly the same thing. They were having hard times having their ideas heard, and they didn't understand what they were hearing from management sometimes. Something you can relate to from your experience?
Absolutely.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
And I want to take you back for a second. When I worked at IBM as their e-visionary at the turn of the millennium, 75% of projects, big projects, failed to deliver on their expectations. That was at IBM, the then Big Six, the now Big Four, or was it the Big Eight?
I think it might be worse now, but
it's not better.
Yeah.
And in baseball, if you hit a 300, like you miss 7 out of 10, you make millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
But not in business. That's not a good return.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're having a big failure with a lot of these projects happening. So here's where I decided to turn story miners. I've dedicated the company, its resources, its assets, its intellectual property, its narrative, etc., to leaders and leadership teams to help them get the buy-in that they need for their biggest, boldest plans and ideas. We use story mining for that, which is one of our signature offerings. We use customer experience design and journey mapping, and we work a lot with the company's internal resources, particularly their analysts and accountants, because those are the folks that are believed. So as we're working up new ideas, we tend to team up with the folks on the inside as well. And that's starting to make a bit of a difference. These leaders, we were told by the frontline folks, sometimes aren't able to articulate those ideas clearly enough. And why is that? Well, the leader says, I want this number. And they go, well, okay, but what does that mean to me? So that translation is missing, Yeah. Or sometimes the leader comes up with an idea and the team around them knows that it's a bad idea. And the culture is, like no one's willing to approach them and take the risk of that. So we get to step in and clarify the strategy, share if the idea is worthwhile or not, and fill in that gap that we did for years and years and years, which is to make that strategy understandable to the folks on the front line so that they can go, oh, I see how that affects me. I see myself in this whole thing. And, I want to be a part of that. So the secret, your next question is, Mike, how do you do that? So here's the answer. The secret is instead of making the boss the hero or the brand or the product the hero, you make your frontline employees the hero. And you write a story that they can step into so they can be Harry Potter. They get to be Luke Skywalker. They get to be, Nemo or Dory, whoever the hero is to them. And all of a sudden they realize that, all these assets, all these resources around me, I can do something with that. And I think we should do this. And they do it. And it just makes all the difference in the world. And we've done that like dozens of times, and it works really well.
I can imagine, having been on both sides of that equation, pointing at each other and saying, why can't you hear me? That through a method like that, because I imagine every leader imagines that, he or she is enabling their staff by some level, and it sounds like this, if you can actually, use your method with your support and really make it physical, make it visible, and make it emotional, and make it real, as opposed to saying, well, I said at the staff meeting 3 months ago that you're important. So you're important, I was like, well, what? No, that doesn't work. So it's, I imagine it requires a certain type of mindset in the staff and leadership in order for this to work as well, I suppose, because I suppose some leaders are just not open to such a thing.
That's really true. And we're getting better at not working with those folks. Because there are certain consultants that work well with different kinds of people, and there's some that just don't. So if you're a silverback gorilla and all you care about are the numbers, and maybe you're only investment focused because your bonus is in it and you want to be out of there in a year, it might not be the best resource for you. If you're somebody who's open-minded, highly collaborative, articulate but not articulate enough, you care about people. Maybe you've been burned in the past. That's one of the great indicators for us. If a leader's been burned, they tend to be a little bit more human, a little bit more humble, and a little bit more caring. So that's a great relationship for us. And we've had some amazing relationships with people that a lot of others would consider minorities, and helping people share their visions in a way that everybody feels part of them. Being super open makes a great deal of difference. So you're right. A lot of it has to do with personality.
What do you mean by minority in that case?
Well, Black, Asian women,
Okay.
People of just all different kinds of areas. We work with a number of international companies, helping them to get into the U.S. markets and translating their belief systems into language that people here appreciate, and vice versa is really key. Coming from the United States and being born here, but my family heritage is Eastern Europe and Russia and a little bit of Latin America. It's really interesting that the world sees Americans sometimes or often as having a sense of, we're more important or we're first. And I don't believe that. I think that every place on the planet has some really cool stuff going on. And I think they need to stand behind that. I think they need to go, we're really proud of this way we are with our calor humano, our human warmth in Latin America, because so many folks there are wired for service already. They care about other people. Not to generalize, but some of the pockets of folks that I've worked with have that in spades. And that's like core to customer experience. So doubling down on that in Mexico is very cool. So those are some examples.
Well, there's so much to talk about. I know myself, having lived over in Europe and out of the US, even before that, up in Canada, I've seen, over that 20 odd years, a significant shift in fandom of, Americana fandom that, was around that time when things started changing, because at one point, backpackers would put American flags on their backpack, and then they started changing them to Canadian flags because, just because of the political situations, it wasn't appreciated nearly as much. And what I'm seeing over here, at least in Europe, is a pride dimension of really people talking about, well, how, and I'm more in the tech digital space, but certainly customer experience grounded. And people are saying, well, why are we only dependent on, US or Chinese technology? We can do cool stuff as well. Of course, there's some economics there as well. But I'm really, you triggered me earlier on something that the head of experience, or the chief experience officer, commented that, that's their job, and they didn't need that kind of advice. I'm curious, because I see the same thing in chief digital officer world. And let me explain it for a little bit. I'll try to be brief, but you have an organization, they know they need to do something in customer experience or in digital. My belief is you should not have a digital strategy. You should digitize your strategy. That's a different thing. But oftentimes they say, well, let's go hire the head of experience or the head of digital and put them in an office, and then they will solve that problem. And they are actually an expert that could solve that problem, but because they have been hired and stuck in an office, they actually have no chance. And then there's a whole industry that is created selling the same dog food to those same people. So there's this whole sort of, inward looking, in the experience office and in the digital office. Yeah. And what I'm always looking for is, well, wait a second, who's that? Where's that business fabric, those leaders and those people and that gooey mess in between that are really hungry and open for an experience, inspiration or experience direction. So it really resonates with me on, don't sell to the CDO or don't sell to the head of experience. But how do you find those leaders or those buyers that are enlightened enough to care and be interested, but are not yet experts on their own? Because there's a certain demographic there.
Yeah, I get on podcasts with my friends and hope they're listening.
So, okay, well,
it's a multi-part strategy, and it's all based on luck and guesswork. I think everyone in the world is struggling right now with how to make relevant and rewarding connections with others, because marketing is so, insert your favorite cuss word in your language, broken. We spend billions of hours every year as a population in the United States just watching commercials. And it's kind of a shocking statistic, but think about it. People are willing to just sit and pay with their time to watch the shows that they kind of care about. Think about the waste of time that all those commercials to non-interested people. What could we do with that resource with billions of hours? How many problems could we solve with that? Why are so many more people making money selling marketing than actually gaining clients from it? It's bizarre. It's like the gold rush. The only people that really made money were the shovel salesmen and the boot people, the pet mule sellers. So it's very, you can tell I'm trying to make light of it, but it's extremely frustrating to try to launch something new in today's world because so much is broken and it takes so much more effort. It takes many times more percentage points of your time to just do the basics. And they're so complicated because everyone's trying to make a little bit of money on the way to you finding a client. So what started off with the internet and the promise of information as power and information as all has become a series of dikes and dams and, spinning wheels where you have to push extra hard to get everybody else paid before you might have a chance at getting paid. All right. So that's the sour milk answer. And the answer to the question is I'm trying a few new things at the same time. One is shorter communications, higher repetition, and much more forceful messaging. People have about this long as they swipe their phone. So headlines first, detail second. We're keeping our stories shorter. We're using a lot more media, doing a lot more video. We're experimenting with a technology called Video Ask that I absolutely love. It allows us, videoask.com. Okay. I'll send you a link for that as well.
Yeah.
Video Ask is a technology that basically lets you do an asynchronous video communication in two directions. So, yeah. Cool. So I have a couple places on my website at storyminers.com where people can click and ask a question about anything. I get an email. I click on it. I see the person's face and their question. I click reply and I can give them a video answer right there. And it's not a bot. And it's not a process. Yeah. It's human to human, which is very cool. It's breaking down boundaries for me and borders in LinkedIn when I use it in combination with LinkedIn. So we're trying a number of things like that, programming-wise, content-wise, a number of other experiments as well. And I don't have the answer yet, Chris.
Well, there is no answer, but it's fascinating. I think one place where the answer could start is, correct me if I'm wrong, is the person that could benefit most is, an executive, so strategy driving person in a business operation that knows that they need to get their staff mobilized. The traditional ways of doing it hasn't worked. Really wants to create a new narrative around the reason why of this change and really paint the picture of how the entire organization could be part of it. So, so listeners, probably half of you are that. So you know how to get a hold of Mike now, Mike Wittenstein, and I've been delighted to work with Mike when I was back at LeasePlan. And the story there was really similar because I was, at that time, the group CIO, and LeasePlan is over 30 plus countries. And I was looking at the spend, again, going back to the bean counters. As a trained accountant myself, I tend to measure that kind of value capture with the beans flowing. And when we did an assessment, most of the projects were not directly related to customer value creation or satisfaction or loyalty at all. Most of them were, you could call them corporate hobby projects that, of course, people couldn't get behind because why the F are we doing this thing? Why are we spending that much to automate that thing in that corner that no one looks at? And that's when we met at the Customer Experience World in London. You were able to come over and really got into that whole, I don't know what this is. So that's a first. really got into the question of why does the company exist and how can we connect those initiatives to the purpose of the organization. And I think that was the first time, well, that I had thought of it that way. And a lot of people in the room were also confronted. And I remember at that point, you also just spontaneously started a brown paper exercise on the purpose of the organization. What you're able to do is take that that group of people and do the brown paper exercise and start pulling out some of those questions. And I think for me that was that just started moving my brain in all sorts of different ways. It was just a delight. And then of course I've been a fan ever since.
Can I ask you a couple of questions about back then?
Yeah, go.
Right. So when we did that impromptu exercise and we ended up with a reason for being, some principles that everyone would work by, and a clear articulation of what the emotional value of working with the brand was, where did your brain go? What did you think you'd be able to do with that?
Well, I was already on the path to enlightenment, if you want to call it enlightenment. I mean, I was open to it. I was already seeing that, from a technology perspective, in order for us to actually create value, I needed to connect and work through the commercial team. And so for me, it was an opportunity to open dialogue and engage with other, executives to try to make a togetherness and a connectedness. Yeah. I remember with the nature of that business, it's basically a platform business in a way. It's you have customers and drivers, and then you have the suppliers and car manufacturers, and it's essentially just managing the inefficiencies between those. And through that also sparked the supplier experience view as well, because actually most of I remember this now, most of the touch points that were sort of branded were actually fulfilled by someone else. And so we really, and that's another way of saying staff, in a way, is a really distributed staff. The issue, however, was, and this is where sometimes it might be selling disappointment, that I was not able to get the true C-suite at that point to really sit up and take note, probably because it was so successful, it was so profitable already. And so, the interesting thing was the brand motto at that time, it's easier to lease plan. People knew it was aspirational, but they also knew, based on measurements and metrics, that it wasn't necessarily easier, certainly even against competitors. And so that was also I remember being in some meaningful conversations in those extended management teams that I won't elaborate too much on, but some serious conflict on honesty and integrity and what is, if it's aspirational, but if you're so far off, and then how, and it's interesting now that the new ownership of LeasePlan, that I'm not related to, or even, it's very far from, they've changed the tagline to "What's next?" And so it's very much a invitation for nextness. And I think that's probably easier to live up to in a way.
Yeah.
So it's, but why did you ask the question? What was your need there? I'm curious.
Oh, I was just really curious, and I was hoping it would be a demonstration point for everyone that's listening, that you really do have to have those heartfelt conversations. Oh, now it's my turn. So why did I ask? Because I was hoping that it might turn into a learning moment for everybody that's listening. It's so important to get that reason for being lined up in everybody's head, because when you do, people can be more focused on just checking for why rather than worrying about what. When everyone's on the same page, when they're headed for the same jobs to be done for customers, it's so much easier to make the right decisions. And when you also understand emotionally what your brand is promising to customers, you can start to fine tune the details. So that takes out effort, it takes out mistrust, it puts in a little bit of enjoyment where it needs to be. But that is job number one. And now you know why I'm focused right on the C-suite. I had my number of experiences working with Chris Parkers at different companies. And sometimes they get executive support and sometimes it just wasn't there.
Yeah.
So working right with that team where it's a safe environment, where they feel secure, where they get a chance to explore several different options before they roll everything out. And we've even got a new offering that we call Sounding Board. And Sounding Board gives the leader of a company or a leadership team an opportunity to explore in some level of detail what a strategic choice might mean for them and for their employees. So we actually paint the picture a little farther down. It's like wireframing a website. It's on paper. It's like so fast and it's so inexpensive compared to spending millions and millions of dollars on training and hardware and construction and all this other stuff. So it's a more nimble way to go.
Well, I can't recommend it enough, because it's what sort of comes to my mind is people might be familiar. It's really hard to write your own CV, and it's almost really even hard to write your own strategy because you're so close to it. Mm-hmm. You really can't see the forest through the trees. And if someone is really going to embark on something truly meaningful or disruptive or transformational in their organization, then going through this kind of process, to reflect, does it make sense for the organization? And it doesn't mean it has to all be all good, but what does the impact? Can the organization withstand the impact? If it's perceived as a negative thing, or if it's a positive thing, can they support that? And really have those meaningful conversations. So, in the last little bit, I'd love, because Mike, you were really kind enough, as I think maybe the first person out of the Netherlands to have gone through the booster program. So, and to date, you are the person who went through the absolute fastest. So you actually did a section per day. It was incredible. I think it was over the course of a week. We were just chuck.
I was motivated,
and it was incredible how we went through and went through the tool, which has evolved since then. It's now called the Simplicity Scan. How was that for you? And have you, as you've continued to iterate, was that impactful for you, or what was the what was the lasting value?
The biggest impact you've had on my business life, not personal, but just the business side of things, is simplicity. It's so important. When I went through the very first one, I was in the beginning throes, this was about 2 years ago, 18 months ago, whatever, of trying to figure out, how do I make sense of the world? My brain was already lit up. I had 8 cylinders, all 9 were firing. I was figuring this out super hard, leaning in. I was learning. I felt myself changing and evolving. And that's when your tool hit. And I would suggest that that's the best time to use your tools, when you're already in the thick of thinking and re-engineering what you're doing, because it's just like pulling a red thread and everything lines up to it. That was amazing.
Or it doesn't. Yeah. Thank you for that. Cause I think you were so motivated at that time, and it was just a joy to be a party to that a bit, and, maybe ask some challenging questions now and again, and try to help simplify the complex into something that's more. And as I like to say is if the red thread isn't always there, but what I like is when people stick to it until they find the red thread. Because if it doesn't feel good, it won't end well, as they say. So keep working it until, okay, this is something that I can use for now until I do something and learn and then reflect. So. But
the other thing that I liked about it, and then I want to talk about the current iteration of tools. The other thing I liked about it was you would give personalized, quick video responses. And I thought that was a stroke of brilliance, because who wants to go through a workbook? You're going to end up being just like everybody else, or you're going to kind of get stuck and there's nobody to talk to. And they'll say, well, you can read chapter 7 or go to our online help, or you can buy this other course to learn that one thing that you need to know. It's such a sales game, and it doesn't add a lot of value. You added tremendous value because you've been there and you get people really quickly. You produce films. My gosh, you have to understand people. You're telling stories that are heartfelt and designed to transform others' thinking and feelings and stuff like that, and to entertain. So you were amazing at getting me to that next step. So speed-wise, I just felt this acceleration going through it, which was a joy. And the current one is even better, because instead of it being so raw, and one step at a time. This one is like system. It's like get the whole picture right, and you can see the whole thing right from the start. So as you're thinking and solving problems, you know that you're going to need to fill these other things out too. And that one little shift, to me, makes a huge amount of difference. So congrats on the progress. And that's heartfelt. That's not just because we're on a podcast.
I feel it from you, and I really appreciate it. And it's still growing because it's the more just as you will continue to iterate your offering and who you're doing it for and with. I just love it when people come back and tell me that didn't make sense, or that didn't, or how about this? And a lot of the time you ignore it because there's a reason or whatever, but sometimes you're like, yeah, maybe it's time for a new version. If I fiddle with that a little bit. So Mike, thank you so much for that. This has been a delight to have you here. If you're out there and I know you do work in at least, the US and Europe and probably anywhere, but it's storyminers.com, Mike Wittenstein on LinkedIn. So I urge people to reach out there. There's a few things we'll put in the show notes, the Forbes article and video ask at least. Mike, thank you so much. This has been a joy.
Awesome to reconnect with you. Congrats on everything that you're doing.
Thanks, Mike.
Learn more at ebillion.com/podcast.